I'm here this evening on behalf of the petitioners, Crafts Development LLC and SRG Holdco Investments LLC, which seek to develop a site on Craft Street as an elderly housing with services community. The proposal would include a mix of 129 independent living units, 52 assisted living units, and 28 memory care units. I want to note that due to the hybrid nature of the hearing tonight, I'm joined in the chamber by Damian Chaviano of Mark Development, and the other members of our team are all participating virtually via Zoom. The site consists, if you can show the site plan, thank you. The next shot, please. Thank you. The site consists of 7 parcels with a total area of 115,744 square feet on Craft Street and Court Street. You can see Craft Street and Court Street. You can see Washington Street on the lower end of the shot and Craft Street off to the right, and Court Street runs perpendicular to Washington Street. The parcels on Craft Street are in the manufacturing zoning district, and the 2 on Court Street are in the multi-residence 1 district. Our proposal would require a rezoning of all 7 parcels to Business 4 and a special permit for the proposed use and other related relief. In the months leading up to this evening, we have engaged in community outreach with neighbors and stakeholder groups. We held well-attended virtual community meetings on January 20th and again on April 25th. And this past Saturday morning, we had a site visit attended by many of the residents on Court Street and a few on Craft Street, along with 5 of the 6 Ward 1 and Ward 2 councilors. We have also met previously with representatives of the Council on Aging, Green Newton, and Engine 6, and we have appeared before the Urban Design Commission and the Newton Housing Partnership. In a moment, I'm going to turn this over to Damian, who will provide some background information as to the proposed use and discuss specifically the height of the building. Then Tim Fox of SRG will tell you a bit about his company and discuss the proposed operation of the facility. Following Tim, John Martin of Elkus Manfredi will review the building design, and then Damian returns to review the fiscal impact and the inclusionary zoning elements of the proposal. And I will then conclude the presentation by discussing the relief requested. I would note that we're deferring discussions of sustainability, stormwater, and civil engineering, and transportation and parking to subsequent hearings, and that's been done in consultation with the Planning Department.
My name is John Martin with Elkus Manfredi Architects. I'm also a Newton resident and the architect of this proposal. As Steve mentioned, the site is on a manufacturing and multifamily residence zoning. We're looking to change that zoning to BU4. And the site is, I want to point out just how proximate it is. It's less than 500 feet from the nearest commuter rail stop here at Newtonville. It's very proximate, obviously, to the Whole Foods, grocery shopping, Marty's Liquors, deli shopping, and community services like churches, a commercial office building, and other uses along Washington Street. In fact, the whole redevelopment and re-envisioning of Washington Street, as you well know, is a part of the Washington Street Vision Plan, which was adopted in 2019, and the blue segments color-coded here represent areas that in that plan were designated to be between 3 and 6 stories tall, the yellow between 1 and 3 stories tall. And as you can see, the entirety of our building footprint and the vast majority of the site falls within that blue zone. That calls for one of the key premises of the West Newton zoning, the Washington Street Vision Plan calls for a variety of heights, and specifically a variety of heights and architecture that step down as they go towards residential abutters. So you'll see how we're attempting to do that in the design. If I superimpose the site plan on that site, the first thing that I would hope you would notice would be that the site is much greener. The site today is a bus parking lot, 2 commercial buildings, and 2 small homes. And by proposing this project, we're able to increase the green space and the open space on the site considerably, or at least the pervious areas of the site. I will point out that the building takes a U-shaped form with a courtyard opening up primarily to the southeast, and that it above the second story separates into 2 wings. The wing on the north, a 7-story independent living community, and then to the south here, a 5-story wing that houses the memory care residence and the assisted living residence. The site centers around a courtyard, which is an outdoor amenity space for the residents, and has a vehicular arrival court here to the south. If I bring you a little bit closer into the site plan, I want to point out that first and foremost, we're trying to make a very walkable project here. We're trying to make all of Washington Street more walkable, more pedestrian friendly, and we have considerably improved the sidewalk condition and the pedestrian access along Craft Street, including a primary entry from Craft Street for pedestrians into the independent living wing. For those arriving by vehicle, for residents, for staff, for visitors, we've consolidated 5 curb cuts down to 2 curb cuts, and the primary vehicular entrance is here to the south. The cars come in, and if they live here or work here, they can go immediately into a 1-level below grade garage, which has 140 parking spaces in it, or they can come into the arrival court and be dropped off either to enter through an entry here to the independent living wing or an entry here to the assisted living and memory care wing. All of the service traffic for food and laundry and etc. comes head off of Craft Street, pulls into this tail, backs into a loading area, and then goes head out. So there's no backing or maneuvering of service vehicles off of Craft Street. And then finally, this lighter colored path that you see to the west is an emergency access for fire department only. It's gated, it's closed off. There will be no vehicles on that path unless the building is burning. And then we would want vehicles on that path. However, it does make a nice perimeter walking path for the residents, for the community members. And one of the things that we think we've heard from the neighbors on both sides, on Court Street and in the Lincoln Road neighborhood, is that a pedestrian connection from Court Street across to Craft Street would be a benefit to the neighborhood. So we're showing this southern connection, the sidewalk that has a lush green buffer. In fact, as a function of the BU4 zoning, the setback off of the south will be approximately 27 feet. The setback off of the west will be 36 to 42 feet at its closest point. And the distances from the nearest house, the townhomes up here, to the face here is 62 feet. And from the nearest point on this house to the nearest point on our project will be 61 feet. So considerable setbacks, considerable green buffers on all sides. I forgot to mention that the setback to the north is also about 30 feet, and the setback along Craft Street is about 12 feet to the lowest portion of the building. If I take you up above the intersection of Craft Street and Washington Street, you see Marty's, you see Whole Foods, you see the office building at 29 Craft Street. This is the 7-story option that we're starting with. And you can see how the majority of the height of the building, you'll see this both in 7 and 6-story options, is aggregated to the north, where the shadows primarily will fall on Craft Street and to the north. And then the shorter 5-story building is to the south. That allows more daylight to penetrate into the courtyard. And also the 2 wings separate above the second floor, which allows the late afternoon sun, the western sun, to get into the courtyard as well. You can also see how the corners and edges of the building are chiseled and set back and set down on both of these schemes. The 6-story scheme reduces the independent living wing by 1 story. The assisted living and memory care wing remains at 5. If I go to the ground, standing with Whole Foods on my left and the office building at 29 Craft Street, and I look north on Craft Street, I see the vehicular entry, the pedestrian entry facing Craft Street, and the 7-story volume stepping down to the 5-story. This is a considerable setback at this vehicular entry, designed to minimize the height, the appearance of height of the building. The 6-story version reduces that appearance even further, and the distance of the setback from the 5-story to the 7-story piece almost eclipses the additional story. A similar effect is noted from the edge of Lincoln Street at the intersection of Craft Street. We're looking across the street to the pedestrian entry, the kind of front porch, the pedestrian address of the project. And the 7-story version is a 5-story kind of cornice and then a setback to an additional 2 stories. When we reduced that to 6 stories, we also had to reallocate where all the units are, and we ended up with a second row of balconies here, which we think enhances that facade, gives it a little more shadow and depth, and makes it more interesting. When we move around to the north and look south on Craft Street, we see the 29 Craft Street office building on the left, and our 5th story, that's a 5-story building, and our 5th story cornice roughly equates to that height. It's within a foot or two. And then this was the 7-story scheme. When we reduced that to 6, we can again see how taking an additional floor off reduces the head or the attic story of the building, and that cornice aligns nicely. I mentioned that as we come closer to the neighborhoods and as we come closer to the sidewalk, we step down. This is a 1-story pool and fitness volume that comes closer to the street to make it more walkable, to kind of give the pedestrians an edge to move against there. It's still 12 feet from the edge of the sidewalk to the face of that building to allow for a green buffer. When we go around and stand on Washington Street, look across the Whole Foods parking lot at the 7-story scheme, you'll notice that the multi-purpose room for the independent living community sat at the northwest corner of the wing. And when we reduced the height to 6 stories, we relocated that multi-purpose room to be now on the southeast corner, looking back across to the west and across the primary entry there that we showed you from the ground floor. If I take you back on Court Street and look at the back of Marty's Liquors here, there's a very nice beech tree that we suspect is over 100 years old. It's a heritage tree. It's technically not on our property, but obviously its drip line and its roots are. We'll take every effort to preserve that tree and make sure that it survives both the construction and then afterwards. You see here this walking path that I mentioned and how it goes through there, the 28 or 27-foot setback from the property line on the south, the 61-foot setback from the edge of this house really helped to reduce the perceived height of the project as it comes closer to the neighborhood. And then if I take you above that beech tree and look over the roof of Marty's, you can see how that pedestrian path wends its way through this 30-foot deep green buffer that moves from Craft Street back to Court Street. You can also see from this illustration how the building terraces down from 6 stories to 5 stories, from 5 stories to 4 stories to 2 stories here, 2 stories there, and the gap between the buildings, and how it doesn't present a long facade on any of the exposures. The facades they move in and out. They've got a lot of articulation to try to increase the architectural richness of the project. When I take you to the ground, this is a view of the 7-story option with the multi-purpose room up here at the northwest corner. You can see here the entry for the assisted living and the memory care. You can also see the vehicular entry and exit to the garage. You see the trellis, the outdoor trellis that connects the assisted living wing with the independent living wing, the 3 stories of assisted living above the 2-story memory care portion. This is the memory care great room and dining room. All 3 communities have outdoor space. So the memory care community has an outdoor terrace here on the 2nd floor. And the assisted living community has an outdoor terrace up here on the left on the 6th floor. And here, the independent living outdoor space in the 7-story scheme. When we change that to the 6-story scheme, I'm back in the Whole Foods parking lot looking here. At 6 stories, the multi-purpose room for the independent living is here, and it opens up onto a terrace here. And you can see the 5th-story terrace for the assisted living community as well from this view. If I show you the shadow studies, I think it's a very favorable reading of that in the spring and fall and the shoulder seasons when the sun is at its average height. Most of our shadow is cast to the north and the west in the mornings. None of it falls on the Court Street or the Lincoln Road communities. By noon, the shadow moves around. It's beginning to fall a little bit on Craft Street, but because Craft Street is so wide, no shadow impact in the Lincoln Road community. And then by 3 o'clock, the sun has moved to the due west, and you can see how that slot opens a little sliver of sunlight into that courtyard. And even at 3 o'clock and 4 o'clock in the afternoon, as the shadows lengthen, they're casting across Craft Street and into the office building property, but not really impacting the Lincoln Road neighborhood behind us. Summer is an even better story with higher sun and shorter shadows, but similar kind of narrative. And then in the fall, it's again equal to the spring. Very little shadow impact. The most shadow impact, of course, is in the winter when the sun is at its lowest, the winter solstice when the shadows are the longest. At 9 o'clock in the morning, the sun is almost due southeast, and therefore the shadows are very long, but they're not cast anywhere on Court Street neighborhood. They're cast primarily here to the north in other manufacturing uses and even the Department of Public Works site. They do begin to creep across Craft Street, but as you can see, the shadows that are cast by the existing buildings subsume the shadows. Everything you see here in in purple are the new shadows created by the project. By noon, a little bit of shadow impact for the first couple of houses on Crafts. And then late in the afternoon, just before sunset, the shadows get really long across Craft Street, but you can see there's very little purple, and most of it falls on the road because the existing houses at 3 stories, 2 stories plus attic are already casting shadow there. So we create no new shadow to speak of in December.